4. At saka sa, alam mo, ang Channel 4 kasi malapit sa transmitter ng Channel 9. At kaya medyo yun ang magulo. At pangalawa, doon na nga sa sa Makati, sapagkat nagkaroon ng barilan ng mga pulis to pulis ang nagbarilan doon. At ang mga tao, mga bystander, yung mga nanunood silang tinamaan ng mga ng bala, ng stray bullets. Yun lang. Samantala yung mga people power, nananatili silang nakakordon sa may Camp Rani. At ngayon, tingnan natin kung may papaabot natin yung pangyayari sa Malacanang. Tingnan natin kung makakuha tayo ng news sa Malacanang. Sandali lang, Rafi, tambay at bibigay namin sa inyo. Naayos natin yung linya sa loob.
Okay,
British Broadcasting Corporation na bibikulo mo na.
sige.
Na so offer kan Amerika kay Marcos to step down from Malacanang. Si Marcos habo. He has definitely refused to get out of Malacanang, and he has called on his supporters to go to Malacanang with their arms. Kung sa Bicol, nanawagan si Marcos kapos ng mga supporters, Marcos loyalist, na magduman sa Malacanang, darahon ang senta mga armas. Masama ito. Siriman, ang siyudad Canaga, iyo ang primerong siyudad sa Pilipinas na kung saan si Mayor del Castillo nag-orden sa City Treasurer Canaga na dahil na pagpadarahon ang kwarta sa national government ni Marcos sa bakuna ni ang presidente ng Pilipinas, kundi ini yung kwarta ka siyudad Canaga ipadala na sa gobyerno ni Cory Aquino. Makita na duplicate sa
Teka sandali, Kuya Dan, garo on air ng Manila, no?
Okay,
we now suddenly discover among us a people who not only love freedom but exercise it, and through exercise it being a very mission for in the utilization of the balance which is its voice in the selection of its leaders in their country.
Medyo tahimik sa loob, aywan kung kaya't medyo sarado tayo. Samantala, nais namin na Rafi, baka mayroon kang gustong malaman.
Has rejected the United States demand 2 times. These are the headlines, and are here for you in full. The 27th Soviet Communist Party Congress...
teka muna, huwag ka nagkamali.
From the White House spokesman Larry speaks, that it will be possible to solve the crisis in the Philippines only by restoring power to a new government. Report that the
Okay, at
Well, yan po mga tugang saro sa mga covering mobile units naman sa Manila na sa parte palan kan may kanto kanda sa may area kan Timog and Mother Ignacia area where they were positioned. They could hear the firing salvos, the exchange of fires kan duang faksyon na yo ang grupo kan mga soldado si General Ramos and General Ver. So wala kasubago na alas 12 sa tuya bagang pagkukuha ko ta kani, because in that area, the tower area is where the shooting now is going on. Dahil masabutan duman sa pinagsasabi kan on the spot coverage na announcer na kunigwa sindang nahihiling as he was asked by the anchor lady, kunigwa sindang nahihiling na mga tinatamaan o mga nagiging casualties in the exchange of fires, but according to that particular reporter on the mobile unit, kanasabing linkage duman sa istasyon sa Manila, they could not just determine because they are about 400 meters away from the firing or the fighting scene. Na nasa mobile unit, because as they hear firing sounds, the sounds of firing, they even go to the extent of grabbing their hands. Nako, ano na ini? Yuguyugun mo yan, John, na habang pala na nagpuputukan, nagpaparakpakan pa si mga tao duman sa Timog in sa Mother Ignacia Streets. Na more than nagkagaradan, mga civilians duman sa parte kan Mindanao. Dahil masabutan ko na ng rason, so mga tugang, please stand by for more of this sa muyang dadarahon.
News. First, the main points.
Philippines, throwing the country in an abnormal situation of being headed by two leaders. Mrs. Aquino was sworn in by Supreme Court Justice Claudio T. in the plush suburban Club Filipino. An AP reporter said the club was filled with about 1,000 Aquino supporters, with about 3,000 more standing outside. She has been claiming that she was cheated out of victory in the presidential election on February 7th. Among those attending were Opposition Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile and Lieutenant General Fidel Ramos. They arrived at the club from Camp Crame amid tight security. It was the first time the two appeared outside of the compound since they launched their revolt on Saturday. Mrs. Aquino's first executive order was the appointment of Mr. Salvador Laurel as Prime Minister designate. She renamed Mr. Enrile as Defense Minister, and Lieutenant General Ramos was promoted to the rank of full general and named Chief of Staff. Mrs. Aquino created 8 task force committees. In her brief inaugural address after the swearing in, Mrs. Aquino appealed to the public to work for national reconciliation, saying this is what her husband came home for. Continuing her address, she said, "I would like to repeat that I am very magnanimous in victory, so I call those countrymen of ours who are not yet with us to join us." Meanwhile, at the Malacanang Presidential Palace, Mr. Marcos was sworn in as President of the Philippines for a 4th term. The ceremony, attended by some 2,000 people, was being broadcast live in a TV program, but the program was cut abruptly shortly after it started. The airport in Manila has been closed to international flights since Monday evening. All departures and arrivals are suspended, and it is not known when the airport will be reopened. Philippine Airlines canceled all its domestic and international flights scheduled for Tuesday for security reasons. And many foreigners planning to leave the Philippines are now being held up in Manila. Earlier, there have been reports that the Manila airport had come under control of anti-Marcos forces. U.S. President Ronald Reagan has again dispatched his diplomatic troubleshooter, Mr. Philip Habib, on a flight towards Manila as part of a U.S. campaign to persuade Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos to relinquish power. The U.S. State Department spokesman, Mr. Kenneth Bales, that Mr. Habib, who returned to Washington late Saturday from his fact-finding Philippine trip, left Washington Monday night and planned to stop in Hawaii. However, Mr. Bale said any further travel was indefinite. American senators say Washington should grant President Marcos asylum in the United States. As they say, this could be difficult if Mr. Marcos leaves the Philippines amid major bloodshed. The warning came after a group of senators and House representatives were briefed on Monday by Secretary of State George Shultz and Special Envoy Philip Habib on the events in the Philippines. A leading American television network has reported that the U.S. Navy aircraft carrier Enterprise is heading for Philippine waters. NBC said on Monday the 75,000-ton nuclear-powered aircraft carrier was being sent to help evacuate U.S. citizens in the Philippines if the political situation deteriorates further. This news comes to you from Radio Japan in Tokyo. And we are broadcasting on 17.810 and 9.735 megahertz in the 16 and 31 meter bands. Prime Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone says the Japanese government will deal calmly with the situation in the Philippines, taking into consideration friendly relations between the two countries. At a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, Mr. Nakasone said there is a new current emerging in the Philippines, thus acknowledging that the tide is turning in favor of the anti-Marcos camp. Foreign Minister Shintaro Abe said his ministry has been calling on the Philippines to avoid bloodshed and to seek a peaceful settlement. Later, Mr. Abe told reporters that the Philippine armed forces are now almost evenly split compared to 9-1 in Marcos' favor at the start. Mr. Abe also said the United States might be considering granting asylum to Mr. Marcos. Japan Airlines has announced unscheduled flights to and from Manila on Tuesday as the airport in the Philippine capital became operational again. The special plane, a DC-10, which can carry 287 passengers, leaves Tokyo for Manila at 1:15 p.m. local time. The return flight will leave Manila at 6:05 p.m. Manila time. JAL officials said they decided on the extra flights because a number of Japanese wishing to return home have been held up in Manila. The Manila airport had been closed since Monday night because of the presence of Air Force troops in support of Mrs. Aquino and the shortage of manpower at the control tower and the customs windows. As a result, all regular flights from Tokyo International Airport to Manila have been cancelled. Canada has joined a growing number of nations in calling for President Marcos to step down to avoid bloodshed. External Affairs Minister Charles Joe Clark made the call, joining the United States, France, New Zealand, and Australia. The Soviet Union and East European countries seem to have commended the official attitude supporting Mr. Marcos, although they denounced the United States for exerting pressure on the Philippines. The Soviet Communist Party daily Pravda on Monday covered developments in the Philippine situation and carried stories of Marcos' election cheating and rebel leaders' insistence that they be given power. The Chinese government has so far refrained from commenting, but the Chinese news media are giving unusual and prompt coverage to the Philippine People's Anti-Marcos campaign in Manila. The Soviet Union and some of its allies have accused the United States of exerting pressure on the Philippines. Pravda, the Soviet Communist Party newspaper, quotes unnamed observers in the Philippines as saying that a coup was planned against President Marcos and that the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency may have participated in those plans. But Pravda says the rebelling forces have declared the provisional government because they believe that Mr. Marcos cheated Mrs. Aquino out of victory in the presidential election. Poland's Communist Party newspaper expressed a similar sentiment. Vietnam's party newspaper Nhan Giang criticized the U.S. government for meddling in the domestic affairs of the Philippines by pressuring Mr. Marcos to step down. The Chinese government officials declined to comment on the Philippine situation, but the Chinese news media are giving the rebellion unusually prominent coverage, and Chinese television has shown scenes of the Philippine People's Anti-Marcos campaign in Manila. Philippine diplomats overseas are one after another expressing support for rebel forces in their home country. The Philippine ambassador to France and the European community have joined their colleagues stationed in Britain and the Soviet Union in calling for Mr. Marcos' resignation. The long-term crime rate in Japan will be lowered by 0.3.
Hindi po tayo makalapit. At subalit sisikapin pa rin natin na maibigay sa inyo ang istorya. Okay. Ang masasabi lamang natin, ayan, patuloy ang putukan.
Are you maintaining the same position as yung 400 meters away from where it is happening? Mobile 1?
Go ahead.
Are you maintaining the same position noong kayo'y 400 meters away from where it is happening, from the tower?
Actually, lumipat kami ng posisyon. And I would like really to admire our driver, si Eric. Siya nagdadrive sa kabila ng merong sira. Ang ating sasakyan ay pinilit niyang may drive ito. At umikot kami at nakarating kami rito. Kaya naibibigay namin sa inyo ang tunay na larawan na madaganap dito, ang tense situation, sapagkat kami po ay nakalapit. Ang helicopter ay nagpapatok isang burst of gunfire. Hindi po natin alam kung kanino ito, kung kanino ang helicopter na ito, hindi po natin mabatido. Ito ay kabilang kay General Ramos, sapagkat ang nilulusog po ito ay ang sa kalukuyan po, nakikita natin na nagtatakbuhan ng mga tao, nagtatakbuhan po sila papalayo doon sa Torre at medyo lumayo po ang helicopter, the firing has died down at kung maaari lang po ipanawagan natin dito sa ating palatuntunan kung sino malalakbukas ang radyo. Umalis na kayo sapagkat this is no joke. Marami ng bala ang pinakawalan at maaaring isa sa inyo ay tamaan ng sigaw na bala. Yan po ang ating mayula sa kasalukuyan. Hindi po natin ibibigay ang mic. Sandali inahawakan po namin sapagkat patuloy po na umiikot pa rin ang helicopter doon sa tower. Umiikot pa rin po ang helicopter, and the helicopter is helicopter po ay nagbibigay ng hostile fire. At panandalian po ay nagkaroon ng calm dito, nawala ang firing. At sandali lamang hindi preso doon.
Okay, nag-aantay tayo.
Natin ang Red Cross, tumabi sa atin dito ang kanilang ambulansya. At iniulat nila na mayroong mga tinamaan. Ilan na ka? Palagay mo, ilan? Dito sa atin ko, ang nadala namin, 2 pala mo. Ilan ang tama? Maluba ba? Grabe ang tama, grabe. Kung pwede ka bang pumunta rito, pwede ka lumipat dito sa sasakyan natin. Sandali lang. Mga kaibigan, atin po kakamarap panayamin na isang miyembro ng Red Cross. Sila po ay merong nakuha na sugatan. Pwede ka ba makuha ang pangalan mga kapatid? Paul Binimerito. Paul, nasa ka nang maganap yung rapid firing. Dito po kami sa may McDonald's. Sinabi mo kanina na merong casualties na kinakatakot na namin sapagkat napakaraming balang pinaputok. Ilan lang ang casualty na nakita nyo? Ang nakita lang namin, ang hatid lang namin sa bagong lipunan, 2. Isa may tama sa ulo at sa paa. Hindi, ang sinasabi ko yung ngayon, yung sa firing ngayon. Yung ngayon, military, nag-backfire lang yun. Backfire lang sa sarili niya, sarili niya ang baril. Sa mga civilians, meron ka ba nakita ng casualties? Ngayon? Wala pa. Maraming salamat. Hindi, kaisong sa kasalukuyan, nagtatakbuhan na naman ang mga tao. At ito po, mas mabilis ang kanilang takbo. Talagang napupunasan sila. Kapag natatakot po sila, hindi po nila alam kung kanino ang helicopter na ito na nagpapaputok. Bagamat ang ating pong spekulasyon, ang tinitira ng helicopter ay ang tower. Ang tower, ngayon po, may umakyat ang mga kawal sa tower. Siguro nagpapalitan po sila ng putok. Pinapuputokan nila ang helicopter at pinapuputokan din sila ng helicopter. Kaya please, nanawagan kami para doon sa mga nakabukas ang radyo. Kung maaari lamang, evacuate na ninyo ang lugar na ito. Evacuate na ninyo ang lugar. Pansamantala po, nakikita natin na wala pong tigil ang pag-ikot ng helicopter at sa malas ay muli ay lumulusog na naman ang helicopter. At nakakita tayo ng isang wounded mula sa di kalayuan mga 300 meters from here. Merong isang kayakay at nakikita po natin na may mga taong may armas sa mga marines. Nag-spill na sila dito sa Quezon Avenue. Pero ang layo po natin siguro sa kanila ay mula mga 300 meters. Bagamat kitang-kita po natin sila sapagkat ano po ang kalye, maluwag na po ang kalye ngayon, nagsitabihan na ang mga tao. At hindi namin sa inyo mikropono.
Bueno, salamat Alex at patuloy tayong mananawagan. Una ay tsakin ninyo na naroon kayo sa isang ligtas na lugar pagkat kailangan namin kayo at di kasi papanawagan din sa lahat ng ating mga tagapakinig na huwag po kayong mag-isyoso. Kung maaari, lumayo na kayo sapagkat hindi natin
Rito ng mga tao, ang pagtakbo ng mga tao ay isang indikasyon na pinaalis na nila mga civilians at maaaring sila ay magsasagawa na ng isang all-out attack para dito sa grupo ng mga sundalo na kabilang sa kampo ni General Ver na nandoon sa tower. At kanina nga po ay medyo mabilis ang ating pag-uulat, at medyo excited po tayo. Hindi lang po excited yon na may kasama na pong takot yon sapagkat kanina po ay talagang hindi natin na malaman kung saan tayo susuong sa palitan ng putok at nakita po natin na mayroong ilang mga civilians na mga tinamaan at mayroon ding ilang mga military men na tinamaan. Sabalit hindi po natin ma-confirm, hindi natin malaman kung ilan. Meron lang tayong nakita isa na kayakay at sa kasalukuyan po ang mga tao hindi pa rin sila nag-aalisan. Parang patuloy pa rin lang pinanonood ang nagaganap and this is one phenomenon which I can never understand. Parang wala na pong takot ang mga tao ngayon, maging sa tunog ng bala, maging sa kung ano man, at dito patuloy sila na nanonood sila mga kaibigan sa kabila ng nakita nila na rapid firing. And for our part, we just continue to pray na walang matarama ng mga civilians sa kabila ng katigasan ng kanilang mga ulo sapagkat narinig po natin na there were so many shots that were fired, lalo na po yung sa helicopter.
Okay. Move on. At this point ba ay meron pang putukang nagaganap?
Sa sandaling ito ay nawala na naman ang putukan at ang ay nagsitigil na naman at parang nanonood na naman sila ng pelikula. Tunay na sitwasyon na narepret ang helicopter ay patuloy na umiikot at ang helicopter na ito ang siya nag-i-sprays doon sa sundalo na nasa tower na nakita natin na tinamaan ang isang sundalo doon sa tower. Yan ang ating nakikita sa kasalukuyan.
Okay, meron parang ba kayong pag-uulat na gagawin at this time?
Ang atin lang pong pag-uulat, katulad nga sa sinabi natin kanina, mga reformist groups ay biglang nagsitakbuhan at nag-spill out dito sa Quezon Avenue. At kanina nga po, iniulat natin na nagsisipagtakbuhan ng mga tao patungo rito sa may EDSA dahil sa patuloy yung pagpapaputok ng mga sundalo na kabila sa kampo ni General Ramos. Mga kaibigan, sa maniwala kayo sa hindi, nagbabalikan na naman ang mga tao na ito at nag-uusyoso na naman at nakakalat na naman sa kalye at hindi talaga natin malaman kung anong uring katapangan ang kanilang ipinakikita, jealousness o curiosity, at mayroon pa mga bata na nakikita natin. Sa kabila mga kaibigan, ang ating nasaksihan, hindi po natin may paliwanag. Maniwala kayo sa hindi, bumabalik na naman ang mga tao, tumatakbo pang pabalik, may mga nagbibisikleta. I can't understand this. Yan lamang ang ating maiulat sa ngayon, ano? Hindi ko maipaliwanag ang nangyayari na ito. Sa kasalukuyan na yan lamang ating maiulat, naka-standby lang kami kung meron pang mga developments.
Alex, kung maaari lamang ay lumagay din kayo doon sa ligtas na lugar na just in case na magkaroon na uli ng labanan ay naroon kayo sa ligtas na lugar. Hindi baring malayo, hindi baring malayo-layo kayo kaysa ilagay nyo sa panganib ang inyong buhay. Sapagkat alam naman natin na ito'y talagang aktual na labanan at gawin ninyo ang lahat ng katampatang pag-iingat at salamat sa inyong pag-report. At muli tayong nananawagan sa barangay Kate ng lugar na iyon ay kayo po magbigay ng kaayusan doon sa mga tao sapagkat talaga pong nalalagay sa panganib ang buhay ng marami nating mga kababayan.
That's right. So we understand the excitement ng ating mga reporters, ano? Don't worry, na unawaan po natin yun, and we ourselves are taken aback nitong situation na ito. At direkta na po tayong nananawagan sa mga tao na maaari pong nakatune in sa atin ngayon, ano, na talagang curious lamang po kayo at lapit kayo ng lapit sa lugar na yon, bagamat siguro hindi kayo natatamaan pa o hindi pa kayo nagiging biktima ng kung ano pa man pong